Hello, hello, Christina Giordano here, the founder of S.O.U.L, your go-to resource for soulful entrepreneurship. And my philosophy is this: people can no longer be sold to, they must be sold to. However, in order for you to sell with soul, you need to be sold on you first. This is marketing with integrity, where you no longer need to compromise your authenticity, your boundaries, your uniqueness, your wholeness. This is messaging in a way that actually reflects the transformation you provide, because it's your story, your transformation, and nobody can compete with that. This is manifesting in a way that honors your fullness, all of the pieces and parts of you that are meant to be divinely resourced. Join me every Wednesday to learn all of this and more. Let's jump right in. Today's episode is called From Struggle to Soulpreneur, the Art of the Sovereign Surrender. In this week's episode of S.O.U.L, I'm going to dive into what I like to call the sovereign surrender. It's a uniquely feminine quality that is absolutely required, in my opinion, in the journey of soulpreneurship or soul-aligned business building. Now, before we get started, let's talk about what surrender is and what it isn't. And I just want to draw some attention to my cute microphone that is brand new. It's going to help me out today, as my voice is a little iffy at the moment, so apologies in advance. But let's dive into what surrender is and isn't. It's not giving up. It's not quitting. It's not stopping. In no way is it stopping momentum. And that's what people think. They think that when you are surrendering, when you're giving in, when you're releasing control, you're essentially halting momentum. You're stalling yourself. You're waiting for something. You're not doing anything. So, how could you possibly be actively building momentum? Here's the thing though: when you're in that moment of surrender, and we'll get to exactly what sovereign surrender is in a moment. But when you're in that moment of sovereign surrender, it's not passive. It's not. You're actively engaging and allowing something outside of you to carry you forward, to make your move, so that you can move towards what's truer, towards what's aligned, towards what's in integrity for you. Now, surrender in a way can feel like giving up. And this is especially for people who love control. And in a certain lifetime, that was me. Actually, that was me not too long ago. The manifesting methods actually pulled me out of that version of myself where I loved controlling me, the perception of me, the way that I moved through the world. I had to have my hands in everything. Releasing that was such a massive undertaking, but also massively freeing once it actually happened. And so when you do allow this to happen, you allow yourself to receive in ways that you haven't really been able to before, because you're finally letting something outside of you have a say. And we talked about this in a previous episode. When we're closing the gap between who we were and who we want to be, and our contracted version of ourselves and the expanded version of ourselves, when we're closing that gap, what we're actually doing is allowing our higher self to integrate further into us. And so when we're allowing our higher self to integrate further into us, we need to surrender to it. As part of the stewardship of honoring your higher self, being obedient to your higher self, being obedient to the version of you who not only wins, but who just knows how to move. And something that I will always say is, when you are on this path of soulpreneurship, when you are building a truly soul-aligned business, you're not only working with the divine inside of you, you're working with the divine outside of you. It's absolutely required. And in the manifesting methods, one of the things that we do is we create that commitment. I think we actually create vows with the divine to move on our mission, to move on purpose, to move forward with our calling, because you can't do it any other way. There has to be a release of control. There has to be a release of just you doing it all. And so there are a few ways that you could look at surrender. For starters, you can look at it as detachment. And I've talked about this in a previous episode. Detachment is essentially trust. That's really what it is. We detach from outcomes so that we can flow. And at its heart, at the root of it, it's the disconnect of excessive emotion into something. It's the disconnect of excessive emotional investment. That's the best way to look at it. Because when you remove the excessive emotions for something, and if something doesn't work the way that you expect it to or want it to, it doesn't move you as much as it would if you were emotionally invested in it. Now, this doesn't mean avoidance by any means. It simply means you know, like you know, like you know, that everything that happens to you actually happens for you and for your highest good, for the best of all. Another way to look at detachment is looking at it as not necessarily giving up, but giving in. So when you think of, or excuse me, another way to look at surrender, not detachment. When you think about giving in to something, I bet it feels like compromise. I bet it feels like diplomacy. And so when you think of surrender in that way, it feels easier to lean into compromise. It feels easier to lean into giving into something, to life, to whatever you want to believe in, to guide you in a way that allows you to flow with it instead of force it to happen. And then finally, we're going to talk about surrender as a moment for divine intervention to have a say. Now, I talk about this in every episode that I do on video, but my podcast goes a lot deeper into this topic. So if this is singing to you, if it's speaking to you, definitely check out the Souled with Christina Giordano podcast, S.O.U.L. I dive way deeper into my own personal journey with everything that I talk about on there. But also with this episode in particular, I talk about how my business has essentially evolved over time and how sovereign surrender was essential at a certain point. But just as kind of a summary, I started my business back in 2013 and it evolved to what it is today, where I was offering all of the marketing services and chasing all of the clients, whether or not they were aligned. And I hustled quite considerably. And it evolved to what it is today, where I dive into deeper truths, because over time I realized that's what I was craving. I was craving a deeper truth. And the old paradigm of marketing was heavily demonstrating the natural byproducts of your work. So people were focusing on their skill set, on their credentials, on the overarching benefits of their work, of the healing modalities. Nobody was actually speaking to the deeper truth of their work as it relates to the truth within them. Nobody was speaking to something that is rooted, something within their soul. Like there was something missing, and that was depth. I realized that was depth over time. And so as I started to pursue more depth, that's when I started to channel the methods. That's when especially the marketing methods and the manifesting methods, so that people can truly know how to allow their souls to take the lead in this journey of soulpreneurship. And so when we're talking about divine intervention and sovereign surrender, this is reflective of the moments that truly call for surrender. So when you feel like you can't go any further yourself, when you feel like you've done it as much as you could, when you really feel like you're at the edge of the precipice and you're kind of in the dark, you're uncertain, you don't know what's next, but you know that you've done what you could. This is the moment that requires something different. It doesn't require you to pull back your energy. It doesn't require you to stop. It doesn't require you to give up, because that's exactly what I used to do. When I used to hit this edge, this precipice of, oh, okay, I don't know what to do anymore. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this. Woe is me, the whole thing. When I would hit this edge, it was actually calling me to rise. It was calling me to rise in faith. Because remember, we're closing the gap between our higher self and our self in the journey of soulpreneurship. But when we are called to rise, that's essentially what we're doing. We're allowing our higher self to have a say. We're allowing our higher self to intervene. And whatever it is that you believe in, God, source, universe, whatever it might be, love even, that's what you're kind of letting step forward. You're letting the divine around you to step forward and direct, because energy will naturally flow where it's meant to go. And if you soften into the current of that, you will be led, you will be guided. So this moment requires softness, it requires slowness. And that's essentially what surrender is. It's letting grace in. And you get to do this in a way that is sovereign. And that's why I put sovereign in there, because most people think that when they are surrendering, they're losing their power. And that's not true at all. You can surrender and still be fully within your power, because what you're actually doing is you're acknowledging the power of your higher self. You're acknowledging your connection to the divine. And because you are so clear on that connection and rooted in that connection, this is you rising. This is you rising to meet the moment, building momentum. We're still building momentum when we're doing this. So if this process is painful in any way, if sovereign surrender sounds crazy, or if your ego, which is usually what it is that is making you feel pain, convince your ego that it's for your highest good. Convince your ego that it's for your best self, for the highest and best of all. Because nothing is ever really lost. Nothing is ever really lost. It can only be transformed. And holding on doesn't protect you. Holding on to anything doesn't protect you. It constricts you. So the more that you can allow release, the more that you can let grace in, the more that you can just let things unfold naturally, while still taking the right action based on what you know, because it will be blatantly obvious to you where the energy goes and what you're meant to do. That's when you start to move in faith. That's when you start to become the soulpreneur that you were always meant to be. But first, you need to trust. And if surrender, thinking of surrender and detachment being trust, if that's the best way for you to look at it that way. If giving in feels like something, it feels like you can tap into that, and it feels like something that you can do, follow that one. But when we're talking about surrender and sovereign surrender, you maintain your power by knowing that you're held, by knowing that you'll be carried, by knowing that your higher self is there, that you are connected, that you are rooted, and that you'll know exactly where to go. I hope this episode helped you today. Again, check out the podcast Sold by Christina Giordano on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And until next time, be well and take care.